My sister sent me a wedding gift list with 5 luxury items, a Porsche, a $50,000 check, a Prada bag, and other ridiculous demands. I ignored 2 of them, thinking no one would notice. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the unofficial bank, the emotional dumping ground, and the silent fixer for my family. I work as a financial analyst. I am good with numbers, good with planning, and unfortunately for me, very good at cleaning up other people's messes. The biggest mess of my life has a name, and her name is Caroline. Caroline is my older sister. She is 35, and she is what you would call the golden child of the family. If Caroline wanted something, the universe, or rather our parents, was expected to bend over backward to hand it to her. If Caroline made a mistake, it was somehow society's fault, or the weather's fault, or, more often than not, my fault. When we were in college, I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for my own expenses. Caroline, meanwhile, decided that dorm life was too stressful for her creative spirit. So, who paid her share of the rent for a luxury off-campus apartment when she inevitably blew her allowance on clothes? I did. Who quietly paid off her $10,000 credit card debt 3 years ago so our dad, Richard, wouldn't have a heart attack? I did. I did it because it was easier than dealing with the screaming, the tears, and the endless family guilt trips. I was conditioned to believe that keeping the peace meant emptying my pockets. So, when Caroline announced she was marrying Julian, a very successful, very polished man who came from a wealthy family, I braced myself. I knew the wedding was going to be a circus. Out of sheer, stupid habit and, because my mother Evelyn practically begged me in tears to help her out, I agreed to fund the catering and the venue deposits. It was a massive amount of money, but I told myself it was the last time. Once she was married to Julian, she would be his financial burden, not mine. Then, the email arrived. It was the official link to their public wedding website, specifically the registry page. Caroline had sent it to a mailing list of over 150 guests. I clicked the link, taking a sip of my morning coffee, expecting to see stand mixers, Egyptian cotton towels, and maybe a fancy espresso machine. Instead, I almost choked on my drink. There were only 5 items on the list. 5. The first was a brand new Porsche Macan. The second was a $50,000 check, explicitly labeled as a contribution to their future house down payment. The third was a limited edition Prada handbag. The fourth was a first-class honeymoon package to Bora Bora. And the fifth was a standard, $200 blender. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't a joke. Caroline didn't do jokes when it came to money. She fully expected her guests, and specifically me, to fund a lifestyle of absolute absurd luxury. She was marrying a rich man, but she wanted to make sure everyone else paid the toll for witnessing her grand achievement. I felt a familiar knot of resentment tighten in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I decided to play dumb. I selected the blender, paid the $200, and closed my laptop. I figured if I just bought the cheapest thing on there, I could check the box and be done with it. I ignored the Porsche and the $50,000 check, thinking, hoping, that even she would realize how insane it was to demand that from me. I was wrong. Less than an hour later, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Caroline. It didn't say hello. It didn't say thank you for the blender. It read exactly like this. You skipped the main items on the registry. If you are going to be this cheap and jealous on the most important day of my life, then do not bother showing up to the wedding. A minute later, another text came through, this time from my mother, Evelyn. Honey, Caroline is crying. You know how stressed she is. Please just do the right thing and transfer the house deposit money to her account. Do not ruin this for our family. I sat at my kitchen island, reading those 2 text messages over and over again. You skipped the main items. Please just do the right thing. For 32 years, doing the right thing meant swallowing my pride, suppressing my anger, and opening my wallet. I thought about the $10,000 I paid to clear her debt. I thought about the $15,000 I had already wired for her wedding catering and venue deposits. I thought about the fact that I had never, not once, received a genuine thank you. And then, Something inside me just snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive kind of anger. It was a very cold, very quiet, and very absolute clarity. I wasn't just tired of Caroline. I was deeply, thoroughly done. I opened my laptop again. Months ago, when Caroline was too overwhelmed with picking flower arrangements, she had forced me to set up the wedding website for her. She had never bothered to change the passwords. I still had full administrative access. I logged into the back end of the registry page. I hovered my mouse over the Porsche. Delete. I hovered over the $50,000 house down payment check. Delete. The Prada bag. Delete. The Bora Bora trip. Delete. Even the blender. Delete. The registry page was completely empty. I moved my cursor to the description box at the top of the page. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a massive, terrifying rush of adrenaline. I typed a single sentence. The bride has decided that her presence is gift enough for everyone. I hit save. I published the changes. Then, I opened a new tab, logged into my bank portal, and immediately initiated a stop payment and cancellation on the $15,000 wire transfer for the catering. I called the vendor directly. I told them my financial support for the wedding was permanently withdrawn, effective immediately. They were shocked, but they confirmed the cancellation. I closed the laptop. I walked over to the coffee maker, poured myself a fresh cup, and sat down on my sofa. I took my phone, turned the ringer volume all the way up, set it on the coffee table, and waited. It took exactly 12 minutes. The screen lit up. Caroline calling. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Evelyn calling. I let it ring. Then came the barrage of text messages. Notifications popping up one after another in rapid succession. They were group texts, voice messages, missed calls, all forming a digital symphony of pure, unadulterated panic and outrage. My mother left a voicemail first. I listened to it on speakerphone while blowing on my hot coffee. Her voice started out calm, employing that familiar tone she used when trying to appeal to my sense of guilt. Honey, I know you're upset, but this is not the way to handle things. You are embarrassing your sister. Fix the website right now. An hour later, the tone completely changed. Another voicemail from my mother. Do you have any idea what you have done? The website is public. Julian's entire family just saw that. You need to call me back immediately. Then Caroline's voice message came through. Her voice was sharp, uneven, and trembling with rage. You're a jealous, bitter loser. You have always been jealous of me because I am getting the life you will never have. Fix the registry or you are dead to me. Then, right on cue, the high-pitched, performative sobbing started. The kind of crying she had used since we were 5 years old to get everyone to rush to her side and offer her candy or money to make it stop. But sitting there in my quiet apartment, listening to her fake sobs through the phone speaker, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt. No anxiety. No urge to apologize. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a profound sense of control. They couldn't touch me if I didn't let them in. By late afternoon, the phone calls had slowed down, replaced by a heavy, ominous silence. I knew it wasn't over. My mother Evelyn was not the type to let a rebellion go unpunished. At around 5 o'clock, I heard the sound of a key turning in my front door. I froze. I had forgotten that Evelyn still had a spare key from 2 years ago when she came to water my plants during a business trip. The door swung open, and my mother marched in, holding her phone like a weapon. Her face was flushed red, and her eyes were furious. She didn't say hello. She just started yelling. She said I had deeply humiliated the family. She said Caroline was inconsolable, that Julian's wealthy parents were asking uncomfortable questions, and that the caterer had just called them demanding a massive replacement payment that they didn't have. I sat on the sofa, watching her perform. When she finally paused to take a breath, I asked her a very simple question. Did anyone at any point today stop to ask me why I did it? Evelyn just stared at me like I had grown a second head. She brushed the question aside. She reminded me that I had a good job, that I had savings, and that Caroline needed a head start in her marriage. She looked me dead in the eye and said the phrase that had defined my entire existence. That is what family does. We sacrifice for each other." That sentence hit me harder than any insult Caroline had ever thrown at me. Because family had always meant me bleeding myself dry while everyone else took the credit. I stood up, walked over to my mother, held out my hand, and quietly demanded my spare key back. She hesitated, looking shocked that her guilt trip wasn't working. When she didn't move, I told her if she didn't leave my apartment immediately, I would call the police to report a trespasser. She dropped the key on the counter and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on my walls rattled. The weeks leading up to the wedding were brutal. I was officially disinvited and excommunicated from the family text threads. My dad, Richard, who usually stayed out of the drama, sent me one text saying I had gone too far and broken my mother's heart. No one asked if I was okay. When the wedding day finally arrived, I spent it completely alone in my apartment. I ordered a pizza, watched a movie, and tried to ignore the strange mix of guilt and immense relief washing over me. But I wasn't completely in the dark. A mutual friend from college who was attending the wedding was secretly texting me updates from under the table. She sent me a picture of the reception hall. It was a beautiful, extremely expensive vineyard setting, but something was glaringly wrong. The tables were half empty. Apparently, a significant number of guests had pulled out at the last minute because the drama regarding the greedy registry and the canceled catering had leaked through the grapevine. My friend texted me that the tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Julian's parents looked absolutely furious, barely speaking to Evelyn and Richard. They thought the registry incident made their family look cheap and greedy by association. She sent me one last photo of Caroline cutting the cake. Caroline was wearing a dress that cost easily over $8,000, but her smile was completely forced. Her eyes looked frantic, darting around the empty chairs. I didn't respond to the messages. I just saved the photos to my camera roll. It felt like a strange kind of closure. It wasn't revenge, exactly. It was just the natural consequence of her own actions catching up to her for the very first time. For 3 weeks after the wedding, I lived in absolute peace. There were no demands for money, no emergency phone calls to fix a crisis, no passive-aggressive Facebook posts directed at me. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. I assumed they had written me off as a lost cause and moved on to their glamorous new life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the postman knocked on my door. He had a certified letter that required my signature. I didn't recognize the sender's name at first, just a return address from a very upscale neighborhood across town. I signed for it, brought it inside, and tore open the thick envelope. At first, I thought it was a bizarre, delayed thank you note for the blender, or perhaps a formal announcement of their new address. But as I unfolded the crisp, heavy stock paper, my stomach completely dropped. It was an invoice. A fully printed, professionally formatted invoice for $53,492. I scanned the itemized list in pure disbelief. It charged me $15,000 for the withdrawn catering funds. It charged me $8,000 for lost gifts from the guests who didn't show up. And the biggest line item, listed for $30,000, was labeled as compensation for severe reputational damage and emotional distress caused by hacking their public website. Attached to the invoice was a handwritten note on Caroline's personalized stationery. The looping, elegant handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "Since you made a public scene out of jealousy, caused us to lose credibility with our vendors, and humiliated Julian's family, we believe it is only fair and legally justified that you reimburse the difference. Pay this within 30 days, or we will take further action." I read the letter twice. Then I sat down at my kitchen counter and laughed. It was a short, breathless, hysterical kind of laugh. I couldn't believe the sheer, unadulterated audacity. I couldn't believe that, even after the disastrous wedding, even after the public humiliation, Caroline still fundamentally believed that I existed solely to keep her world polished and easy. She had actually formalized her entitlement into a bill. For the next few hours, I paced around my apartment, my mind racing. The anger was gone, replaced by a clinical, terrifying observation of her delusion. She wasn't just spoiled, She was completely detached from reality. She genuinely believed she was the victim. She thought she could just send me a bill for not buying her a Porsche and expect me to pay it out of fear. I called a close friend, someone who had known Caroline for years, but had distanced herself after too many toxic drama dinners. When I read the invoice to her over the phone, she went dead silent. Then she said something that clicked perfectly into place in my mind. She said, "You cannot reason with crazy. You have to expose it. Let people see what she is really like." I thought about my friend's advice for 2 days. Part of me still clung to the pathetic hope that someone in my family, maybe my dad, would step in, look at this invoice, and tell Caroline she had lost her mind. Instead, I got a text from Evelyn. "Just pay it, honey. It is not worth the legal fight. Just make it go away so we can all be a family again." That text was the final nail in the coffin. I realized it was never going to end. As long as I kept keeping their secrets, as long as I protected their image, they would keep taking bites out of my life. So, I did what Caroline would least expect. I went nuclear. I opened my laptop, created a throwaway account on Reddit, and navigated to one of the biggest drama subreddits. I wrote a post titled, "My sister sent a wedding gift list demanding a $50,000 check and a Porsche. Now she is invoicing me for canceling my financial support." I kept my real name out of it. I redacted the city, the specific venue, and their last names. But I uploaded everything else. I posted screenshots of the original registry demands. I posted her text messages calling me a jealous loser. And as the grand finale, I uploaded a scanned copy of the $53,000 invoice and her handwritten note. I hit post, closed the laptop, and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was practically melting. The Reddit post had blown up overnight. It had tens of thousands of upvotes and thousands of comments. People from all over the world were tearing Caroline apart. They called her entitled, manipulative, a narcissist, and a textbook bridezilla. But the internet is a terrifyingly efficient machine. Despite my redactions, there were enough clues in the timeline, the specific price of the caterer, and the mention of the vineyard. Internet sleuths in the comments started piecing it together. By noon, someone had guessed the exact city and the venue. By the next day, local gossip pages on Instagram and Facebook had picked up the story, sharing screenshots of my Reddit post. Caroline's name wasn't explicitly printed in the articles, but everyone in our social and professional circle knew exactly who the viral demanding bride was. Then came the phone call from my dad, Richard. He didn't text this time. He called, and he was screaming. He said I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He told me that Julian's business partners had seen the posts and were making jokes about it at the country club. Julian was furious. The family name was a laughingstock. I held the phone away from my ear, listening to him rant. When he finally demanded to know why I would do something so evil to my own blood, I just said, "I didn't write the invoice, Dad. I just showed it to people. If the truth is embarrassing, that is her problem, not mine." Then I hung up. The silence that followed the Reddit fallout was absolute. No one contacted me. Holidays came and went. I spent Thanksgiving and Christmas entirely alone. It was strange, quiet, and a little lonely, but it was peaceful. I wasn't getting yelled at. I wasn't writing checks. Then, 2 months later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and my breath caught in my throat. It was Julian, Caroline's husband. I hesitated, leaving the chain on the door as I opened it a crack. He looked completely tattered. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He asked if he could come in. His voice was quiet, stripped of all that arrogant confidence he usually carried. I unlatched the chain and let him in. He sat on my sofa, staring at the floor, rubbing his hands together. After a long, agonizing pause, he looked up at me and said, "I owe you a massive apology." I was caught off guard. I asked him why. Julian let out a heavy sigh and started talking. He explained that the wedding had been a disaster, but the marriage had been a nightmare. Apparently, Caroline had been lying to him for over a year about finances. She had told him that I was extremely wealthy, much wealthier than I actually am, and that I had eagerly volunteered to cover the entire cost of the wedding because I loved helping the family. When Julian had asked to see the catering receipts months ago, Caroline had actually forged payment confirmations using Photoshop to keep him off her back. So, when I withdrew the catering payment and changed the website, Julian honestly believed I was an unstable, jealous sister trying to sabotage their love out of spite, exactly as Caroline had told him. But after the honeymoon, things started unraveling fast. Vendors started calling Julian directly, threatening to sue because payments had bounced. Then, the Reddit post went viral. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "I didn't believe it was her at first. I thought it was an internet hoax. But then I saw the screenshots of her handwriting on that invoice. I knew it was real." Julian went on to explain that when he confronted her, Caroline had spiraled into a complete meltdown. She blamed me for everything. Worse, Julian discovered she had secretly maxed out 2 joint credit cards to maintain the illusion of her wealthy lifestyle. When he suggested marriage counseling, she threatened to go to the police and invent lies to destroy his corporate career if he dared to leave her. He looked genuinely terrified of the woman he had just married. I asked him what he was going to do. He stood up, looking exhausted but resolute. He said, "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. I have already moved into a hotel. I just wanted you to hear it from me, and I wanted to say I am sorry for believing her." Before he walked out the door, Julian stopped, turned around, and looked at me with a grim expression. "You need to be careful," he warned. "She told me last night that if she loses this marriage, she is going to make sure everyone sees you as the villain. She is going to come after you." I locked the door behind him, the heavy click echoing in the quiet apartment. The peace was over. The real war was about to begin. Thank you for watching this far. If you found this story interesting, please like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, and don't forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every interaction helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. Julian's warning hung in the air long after he left my apartment. She is going to come after you. I spent the next few days jumping at every notification on my phone and double-checking the locks on my doors. But Caroline did not come to my apartment. She went for something much more important to me. She went for my livelihood. The following Wednesday, my boss called me into his office. He is a very practical, no-nonsense man who values discretion above almost everything else. When I walked in, the head of human resources was sitting next to him. My blood ran cold. I sat down in the chair across from them, folding my hands in my lap to hide the fact that they were trembling. My boss cleared his throat and slid a printed email across his desk. He said that an anonymous source had contacted the company's ethics hotline. The email claimed that I had been embezzling company funds to pay for lavish personal family events. I stared at the paper. Attached to the email were altered versions of the catering invoices from Caroline's wedding. The $15,000 charge had been manipulated to look like it was billed directly to my corporate expense account. It was a very clumsy forgery, but in the corporate world, an accusation of fraud is a stain that is incredibly hard to wash out. I took a deep breath. I looked my boss in the eye and explained the situation. I told them about the viral Reddit post, the canceled wedding support, and the vicious fallout with my estranged sister. I offered to pull up my personal bank statements right then and there to prove that the original $15,000 wire and its subsequent cancellation came from my own personal savings account, not the company. Because I had been a loyal, high-performing employee for 5 years, and because I had previously warned my boss in passing about some family drama leaking online, he believed me. The HR director compared my personal bank records with the forged invoice and quickly concluded that the accusation was entirely fabricated. They assured me my job was safe and advised me to keep a close eye on my personal security. I walked out of that office with my job intact, but the emotional toll was devastating. I went to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and just sat on the toilet lid with my head in my hands. The humiliation was heavy and suffocating. My private nightmare had spilled into my professional life. Caroline knew exactly how much my career meant to me. It was my independence. It was the only thing I had built entirely on my own, completely separate from our toxic family dynamic. And she had tried to burn it to the ground with a fake email just because she was losing her grip on her own perfect life. That night, I realized that ignoring her was no longer enough. She was not just throwing a tantrum anymore. She was executing a targeted, malicious campaign to ruin me. The corporate sabotage was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, I walked out of my apartment building to go to the grocery store. It was a bright Saturday morning. I approached my car in the parking lot and froze. Someone had taken a key or a screwdriver and dragged it across the entire length of the driver's side door, digging deep into the paint. Scratched violently into the metal, in large, jagged capital letters, was one word: liar. I stood there staring at the damage, feeling a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My apartment complex had a gate, but it was often broken, and the security cameras pointed mostly toward the lobby, not the far end of the parking lot. I filed a police report immediately. 2 officers came out, took photos, and asked if I had any enemies. I told them I strongly suspected my sister, but I had no video evidence, no witnesses, and no proof. The officer taking notes sighed, closed his pad, and gave me a look of pity mixed with exhaustion. He told me that without hard evidence, there was nothing they could do. It was a civil matter, a family dispute that had turned ugly. I felt incredibly exposed. I drove my vandalized car to my mother's house. I did not know what I planned to achieve, but I was running on pure, terrified adrenaline. I used the heavy brass knocker on Evelyn's front door until she finally answered. The house looked dark and unkempt, which was completely out of character for my mother. Evelyn looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of a few months. Caroline was not there. Evelyn told me that Caroline had moved into a friend's guest house because Julian had officially frozen all their joint assets during the divorce proceedings. I showed my mother the police report and a photo of my ruined car door. I told her about the fake HR email. I demanded that she stop enabling Caroline and force her to get psychiatric help. Evelyn just shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She refused to look at the photos. She said I was being dramatic. She actually told me that Caroline was grieving the loss of her marriage and that I was pushing her over the edge by being so unforgiving. She reached out, grabbed my arm, and pleaded, "Please, just apologize to her. Just tell her you are sorry for the website, pay her the money, and make this nightmare stop. You are the strong one. You can bear it." I pulled my arm away. I looked at the woman who had raised me, realizing she would gladly throw me to the wolves if it meant keeping her golden child comfortable. I walked away without saying another word. When I returned to my apartment that evening, there was a small, folded piece of paper tucked under my welcome mat. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was written in that familiar, elegant script. "Let us see how much everyone loves you when they find out who you really are." I immediately called a locksmith and paid $500 to install deadbolts and a security camera on my front door. I was living in a state of absolute paranoia. The harassment escalated from vandalism to the legal system. About a month after the car incident, I was sitting at my desk at work when the receptionist called me to the front lobby. A man in a plain polo shirt asked for my name, handed me a thick manila envelope, and said, "You have been served." I carried the heavy envelope back to my desk, my hands feeling numb. Inside was a formal notice of intent to sue. The plaintiff was Caroline. The charges listed were defamation of character, invasion of privacy, and the intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. And then I saw the damages she was seeking. $250,000. It was an astronomical number. It was meant to terrify me into submission. She had included printouts of the Reddit post, highlighting anonymous comments from strangers calling her crazy, and claimed that my actions had directly caused the dissolution of her marriage and the destruction of her mental health. I did not panic this time. The sheer absurdity of the $250,000 demand snapped me out of my fear and into survival mode. I asked around and found a highly recommended defense attorney named Madeline. Madeline was sharp, pragmatic, and possessed an ice-cold demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I sat in Madeline's office and handed over the stack of papers. She spent 10 minutes flipping through the lawsuit in silence. Then, she tossed the papers onto her desk and let out a dry, humorless laugh. She told me the lawsuit was complete nonsense. It was a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to intimidate and bankrupt me through legal fees. Madeline explained that the truth is an absolute defense to defamation. I had posted her actual invoice. I had posted her actual text messages. I had not lied. However, Madeline warned me that even a frivolous lawsuit requires a formal defense, which meant I was going to have to spend months gathering every single text, email, and receipt I had ever exchanged with my sister to prove her history of extortion. For the next 8 weeks, my life became a bureaucratic nightmare. I spent my evenings organizing digital files, printing out years of bank statements showing how much money I had given her, and documenting the keyed car and the fake HR email. The stress was eating me alive. I developed insomnia. I lost weight. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart slammed against my ribs. But Madeline was a shark. She filed a motion to dismiss and demanded that Caroline's lawyer produce evidence of financial damages. Weeks rolled by. Caroline's lawyer filed extensions. Madeline pushed back. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, Madeline called me with the news. The judge had dismissed the case with prejudice. Caroline had failed to appear for her deposition and refused to hand over her own financial records during discovery, mostly because those records would have proven she was forging documents to Julian. The case was dead. I had won. But as I hung up the phone, I felt no sense of victory. I knew Caroline well enough to know that losing control in a courtroom would only make her more desperate. The legal defeat sent Caroline into a tailspin. Through the family grapevine, my dad Richard reluctantly informed me that Caroline had suffered a complete breakdown and checked herself into a voluntary psychiatric facility in upstate New York. For a very brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she was finally hitting rock bottom. Maybe a professional could finally break through her delusions. That hope lasted exactly 14 days. Caroline signed herself out of the facility against medical advice. She claimed the therapists there were toxic and jealous of her. A week after she left the facility, a package arrived at my door. It was a heavy wooden box with no return address. My heart pounded as I carried it to the kitchen counter. I grabbed a pair of scissors, cut the packing tape, and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of crumpled tissue paper, were shattered fragments of luxury items. I recognized them instantly. There was a crushed silver clasp from a Rolex watch. There were shredded, slashed strips of leather that looked exactly like a Prada handbag. There were pieces of expensive ceramic cookware, all smashed into jagged shards. Resting at the very bottom of the box was a small, folded note. "You did not buy them, so I broke them myself." I stared at the debris. It was a physical manifestation of her broken mind. She had actually spent her own dwindling money, or perhaps money she had stolen, to buy the items from her failed registry, just so she could destroy them and send the garbage to me. It was not just petty, it was deeply, profoundly unhinged. I threw the entire box into the dumpster outside my building, but the image of those shredded leather straps haunted me for days. Then came the public relations campaign. Caroline reinvented herself online. She created a brand new Instagram account dedicated to, of all things, healing and mental wellness. She posted highly edited photos of herself drinking green juice, doing yoga on a cliffside, and staring pensively out of windows. The captions were long, poetic essays about surviving narcissistic family members, breaking generational trauma, and rising above the jealousy of a toxic sibling who tried to destroy her wedding out of spite. She even managed to get an interview with a small, independent online magazine that focused on self-care. The article painted her as a brave survivor of severe cyberbullying, a beautiful bride whose special day was hijacked by a bitter, unmarried sister who weaponized Reddit to ruin her life. The comments section under her posts flooded with sympathy from strangers. They called her a warrior. They told her she was an inspiration. I watched her spin her lies into an entire brand, converting her cruelty into a shield of victimhood. It made me physically sick. But I took Madeline's advice. I did not engage. I did not post a rebuttal. I did not try to defend myself to strangers on the internet. I deleted all my social media apps. I decided I needed a clean break. I broke my lease early, packed up my life, and moved to a smaller, quieter apartment on the other side of the city. I did not give Evelyn or Richard my new address. For the first time in years, I started prioritizing my own happiness. I met a man named Nathaniel. Nathaniel was kind, patient, and completely removed from my family drama. He worked as an architect, loved quiet weekends, and treated me with a gentle respect I had never experienced. We started dating, and for a few glorious months, I felt like a normal person living a normal life. I kept the darkest details of Caroline hidden from him, wanting to preserve the safe, untainted bubble. Just as I was starting to breathe again, the bubble burst. It started with a frantic phone call from Evelyn. I had blocked her number, but she left a hysterical voicemail on my work phone. Caroline had vanished. Evelyn said that Caroline had packed a single suitcase, left her car in the driveway of her friend's house, and simply disappeared. Her cell phone was disconnected. Her bank accounts showed zero activity. She had left a short note on the kitchen counter that read, "I need time to be somewhere that does not know my name. Do not look for me. This is a reset." Richard had gone to the police, but they gave him the same tired response I had received months ago. Caroline was an adult. She had left a note indicating she left voluntarily. There was no sign of foul play, so there was no active investigation. Evelyn begged me to help look for her. But I knew Caroline's playbook better than anyone. Disappearing was her ultimate performance. She wanted us to panic. She wanted us to beg for her return. I refused to play the game. I told Evelyn I did not know where she was, and I hung up. I tried to focus on my new life with Nathaniel. We had been dating for 6 months, and things were getting serious. One Friday evening, we went out to a beautiful, dimly lit Italian restaurant downtown to celebrate my promotion at work. We laughed, we drank wine, and for a few hours, the ghost of my sister was completely gone. Nathaniel walked me to my front door, kissed me goodnight, and headed to his car. I unlocked my door, smiling, feeling a warmth in my chest. But as I pushed the door open, my foot brushed against something resting on the welcome mat. It was a small, blank envelope. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. I picked it up, stepped inside, and locked the deadbolt. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It was a picture of me and Nathaniel. We were walking out of the Italian restaurant we had just left an hour ago. The photo was taken from across the street, capturing us holding hands under the streetlights. I flipped the photo over. Written in black marker, in that unmistakable handwriting, was one sentence. "He does not know who you really are." I dropped the photo on the floor and backed away from it. She had found my new apartment. She had followed me. She had sat in the dark, watching me smile with the man I loved, and she had waited for the perfect moment to slip this onto my doorstep to let me know I was never truly safe. I called the police again, but a Polaroid on a doorstep was not enough to issue a restraining order against a missing person. I showed the photo to Nathaniel the next day. I had to sit him down and tell him the entire, ugly truth about my sister, the wedding, the lawsuit, and the stalking. He was shocked, but he did not run away. He held my hands and promised we would figure it out together. But the damage was done. My paranoia reached a terrifying peak. I stopped walking to my car alone at night. I flinched every time a silver car drove past me slowly. I was a prisoner in my own mind, constantly looking over my shoulder for a sister who had officially become a phantom. 14 months passed. 14 long, agonizing months of silence. No letters, no smashed items, no sightings. Evelyn had slowly transitioned from frantic panic to a quiet, depressing acceptance. She convinced herself that Caroline was living on a beach somewhere, finding her inner peace. I stayed vigilant, but eventually, the hypervigilance began to fade. Human beings cannot live in a state of maximum terror forever. Nathaniel moved into my apartment, and we started talking about buying a house together. Then, on a cold Tuesday in November, I checked my mail. Mixed in with the grocery store flyers and the electric bill was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, just my name written in block letters. I opened it carefully, half expecting white powder or another threat. Instead, a folded diner napkin fell out. Written on the napkin in black marker were the words, "You will thank me later." Tucked inside the napkin was a photograph. It was a picture of a newborn baby. It was a little girl wrapped in a hospital blanket, her dark eyes wide and curious. In the bottom corner of the photo, written in Caroline's looping handwriting, it said, "Her name is Cora." My breath caught in my throat. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the face of this tiny human. Had Caroline gotten pregnant? Had she hidden a pregnancy from all of us and disappeared to have a child? It made no sense. I flipped the photo over to look for more writing, but the back was blank. However, as I held the photo up to the light, I noticed the faint, digital timestamp printed on the bottom edge of the photo paper by the developer. I read the date. Then I read it again. The photo had been printed over 14 months ago. It was developed right around the exact time Caroline had vanished. I grabbed my phone and called Julian. We had spoken maybe twice since his divorce was finalized, mostly just exchanging brief pleasantries, but this was an emergency. When he picked up, I did not bother with small talk. I told him about the photo. I asked him, point blank, if there was any chance Caroline was pregnant when she left. Julian was quiet for a long time. Then he let out a heavy sigh and said, "No. It is medically impossible." I asked him what he meant. He explained that years before they got married, Caroline had suffered severe medical complications from a botched surgery. She was entirely sterile. She could never carry a child. They had discussed IVF and adoption, but she always pushed the conversation away, refusing to deal with the reality of it. Julian's words echoed in my head. Medically impossible. I looked down at the photo of the newborn. If Caroline was completely sterile, and this photo was 14 months old, then whose baby was this? Where did she get a newborn infant right before she disappeared off the face of the earth? The mystery shifted instantly from a stalker's annoyance to a deep, terrifying concern. I locked the photo in my desk drawer, feeling a creeping sense of dread that something horrible had happened. 3 weeks after the baby photo arrived, I was in a meeting at work when my cell phone vibrated. I ignored it. It vibrated again. Then a third time. It was an unknown number with an Oregon area code. I excused myself from the conference room, walked down the hall, and answered. The woman on the other end of the line had a calm, clinical voice. She introduced herself as a social worker for the state of Oregon. She asked to confirm my identity. Once I did, she took a slow breath and said, "I am calling regarding a woman who had listed your name and phone number as her sole emergency contact. She was living under the name Lydia Brooks, but we believe her legal name was Caroline." I leaned against the hallway wall, the floor tilting slightly beneath my feet. I asked the social worker where Caroline was. The woman's voice softened just a fraction. "I am so sorry to tell you this over the phone. Your sister passed away 4 days ago." The world went completely silent. The hum of the office fluorescent lights, the chatter from the nearby desks, all of it faded away. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just felt a massive, hollow shock. I asked what happened. The social worker explained that Caroline had suffered a massive, sudden brain aneurysm. She had been working at a small, independent bookstore in a coastal town in Oregon. She collapsed in the break room and died before the ambulance arrived. Then, the social worker dropped the second bombshell. When the authorities searched her small apartment to find next of kin, they found a toddler. A 14-month-old little girl named Cora. My knees actually gave out. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the carpet. I told the social worker about the photo I had received. I told her that my sister was medically sterile. I told her that baby could not be hers. The social worker let out a heavy sigh. "Yes, we know," she said gently. "The hospital ran a DNA test when the child was brought into protective custody. There is absolutely no biological relation. Furthermore, there is no birth certificate for Cora on file in the entire state. There are no adoption records. Caroline faked the immunization papers to get her into daycare. The social worker explained the prevailing theory. Before Caroline vanished, she had spent a few weeks at that psychiatric rehab facility in New York. The police suspected she had met a desperate, pregnant woman there, perhaps someone struggling with addiction who could not keep her child. Caroline had likely convinced the woman to give her the baby off the books, taking the newborn and fleeing across the country to invent a brand new life. The social worker's tone became strictly professional again. She told me that Cora was currently in an emergency foster home, because they had no idea who the biological parents were, and because my name was the only one written in an envelope in Caroline's apartment, they were calling to ask if the family wanted to claim the child. If not, Cora would be permanently absorbed into the state foster care system. I sat on the floor of my office building, my mind spinning. Caroline had stolen a life to replace her own. She had caused me years of misery, cost me thousands of dollars, and tormented my sanity. And now, from beyond the grave, she was dropping the ultimate consequence right into my lap. I flew to Oregon the next morning. I didn't tell Evelyn or Richard yet. They couldn't handle the logistics of a sudden death, let alone the revelation of a secret, undocumented child. Nathaniel drove me to the airport, holding my hand the entire way, promising he would support whatever decision I made. The coastal town was gray and raining when I arrived. I went straight to the Child Services office. Before I met Cora, the social worker handed me a clear plastic evidence bag containing the few personal items found in Caroline's apartment. Inside was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook. I sat in a sterile waiting room and opened it. The first few pages were filled with mundane grocery lists and work schedules. But halfway through, her handwriting changed. It became sharp, rushed, and frantic. It was a diary. She had written extensively about me. But for the first time in her life, the words were not dripping with venom or victimhood. It was a terrifyingly raw confession. She wrote, "I know I am broken. I know I destroy everything I touch. Every time my sister paid to fix my mistakes, I hated her for it, because it just proved I was incapable of fixing myself. I took the money, but I wanted the control." I turned the page, my hands shaking. The entry shifted to the baby. The mother was a girl named Sarah, just 19, terrified and addicted. Caroline had offered her $20,000 in cash, likely the rest of her hidden credit card funds, and a promise to vanish with the baby. The final paragraph of the notebook hit me like a physical blow. "Cora is not mine," Caroline wrote. "But she saved me. I thought if I could raise a child perfectly, far away from the noise, I could finally be a good person. I could finally be someone worth loving. If my sister ever finds her, tell her this. I wanted to give Cora the life I could not live. I wanted to give her peace." I closed the notebook. I wiped the tears off my face. Caroline had not sent me the photo to taunt me. She had sent it because, deep down, she knew her fantasy life was fragile. She was securing a backup plan for the child she had illegally taken but genuinely loved. A few minutes later, the social worker brought Cora into the room. She was small, with a head of thick dark curls and wide, observant eyes. She looked terrified, clutching a ratty stuffed bear. I knelt down on the carpet. I didn't rush her. I just held out my hand. After a long minute, Cora took a tentative step forward and wrapped her tiny, warm fingers around mine. I signed the temporary guardianship papers that afternoon. The legal battle to secure full adoption would take years, involving state investigations and endless bureaucracy, but I didn't care. I packed up Caroline's meager belongings, arranged for a simple cremation, and booked 2 tickets back home. It has been 3 years since that rainy day in Oregon. Cora is 4 years old now. She is bright, loud, and full of joy. Nathaniel and I got married last year, a quiet, backyard ceremony with 50 people, no registry, and no drama. I still have nightmares about the keyed car and the fake HR emails. I still have the scars from a lifetime of being my family's emotional punching bag. But when I look at Cora, drawing with crayons at the kitchen table, I realize the profound irony of it all. I spent 32 years paying for my sister's chaotic mistakes. And her final, most chaotic, most illegal mistake turned out to be the absolute best thing that has ever happened to me. So, that's my story. I spent my whole life paying for my sister's mistakes, and in the end, her biggest secret became my greatest blessing. But I still wonder about everything that happened before Cora came into my life. Am I wrong for putting my foot down and ruining her perfect wedding? Should I have just paid the $50,000 to keep the peace? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.